Hi everybody, this is Dawn Rasmussen from Pathfinder Writing and Career Services. Welcome to our third now Career Hangout. This is a very casual conversation to help answer some of the questions that job seekers might have. And today I have with us a wonderful person that I met, I think back in 2008. That's when I think we first met at the National Resume Writers Association conference. And she's a career expert. Her name is Beth Colley from Chesapeake Career Management Services, based out of Annapolis, Maryland. And she's going to be joining us today. I thought she'd be a great person to talk to us because today's topic is all about interviews. And Beth is actually in the final stages of a new interview series that she's producing called Rock the Interview, Interviewing Insight, Strategies, and Advice. So I thought she'd be great. And she's also, I think, has 3 or 4 different certifications. So this lady knows her stuff. So I'd like to introduce Beth. And hey, Beth, welcome, and thanks for joining us today and having a conversation about interviews. This is good stuff to talk about for job seekers.
Thanks, Dawn. I really appreciate the opportunity, and just, excited to be able to answer everyone's questions and do whatever we can to help people, really improve their interviewing skills.
That's great. So let's talk about preparing for an interview, because a lot of people, they get kind of nervous and they feel a little overwhelmed. Okay, finally we get this opportunity to go have a discussion with a potential employer about this job that they're really excited about. But let's just maybe start off, and I encourage anybody who may have some questions or some that they want to go ahead and post them in the chat function if they're watching and like to ask some questions. So anyway, so tell me, Beth, what do you think are some things that we should be thinking about if we're going to be preparing for an interview? Because a lot of people just don't really know where to start, really. So what are some things that you think that they can take away, or at least from this discussion, as far as preparation for interviews?
Certainly the first thing to start thinking about, depending upon your past work environment as you prepare for the interview, is what kind of clothes do you have? If you've been working in a casual environment, maybe it's time to spruce up that wardrobe a little bit. Making sure you have proper tools to conduct a job search with. If it's been a while since you've upgraded your home computer because you relied on work-issued computers, make sure you've got good, reliable technology, good, reliable internet at your house.
And that would be specifically if you're dealing with a video interview, right? I mean, that's, obviously we're preparing for the interview, but, if you're going to be doing a lot of companies now are starting to do video screenings, right?
Sure, yeah. So with the video capabilities, but also just a lot of people will sometimes neglect having a good, fast internet connection or even a modern email address because they've been using work issued. So you want to make sure you've got a good professional first name, last name, maybe a number or 2, simple email for employers. Just all the tools that you need to conduct a proper job interview, and obviously your research habits as well in researching companies and knowing how to work some of the websites, knowing how to work LinkedIn and being familiar with that. So making sure you have those tools and resources via the technology that we need and use today.
Well, I told a lot of my clients that preparing for an interview is just like a job itself. It's you have to gather as much information about a company, a potential employer, as possible. So it might be that you want to, hopefully you have a contact on the inside of the company where you're going to be interviewing, and so knowing a little bit more about the culture of the company is a good thing to do. What do you recommend to your clients about that?
Absolutely the same things. Trying to get as many, understand the culture of it, getting the context on the inside. Using resources like Glassdoor.com is a real good one for people to understand the various interviewing styles and strategies that go on with that company, reading other employees' experiences. Obviously, always take that kind of stuff with a grain of salt. People get upset when they don't get hired by certain companies, and they may write things that just may not be 100% accurate, but certainly take things with a grain of salt with what you see. But yeah, understanding the culture, understanding what their finances are, if it's a publicly held company, If it's a smaller company, checking to see what associations they're active in. Check and see if they're involved with a local chamber of commerce. Check and see if they have big community-wide initiatives. See if they're listed as one of the area's top, 100 or 200 employers or whatever. Check your local business journals and see what you can do to educate yourself on the company, their philosophy, and their reputation in the area.
That you bring up a really good point, because a lot of job seekers end up putting so much power into the hands of the potential employer, but they forget that they really have the opportunity to do some weeding out themselves. So let's just say a job seeker is out there looking for work and they see a company that they're really interested in, they get an interview with that company. So now it requires that deeper dive. So it might be reading news reports and, like you said, looking at financials. Is this company financially stable? If you can dig that information up, and then pinging your network to find out what does the company culture really entail. But it's really part of a bigger picture of what can you find out about the company, and really what kind of environment are you going to be interviewing with, so if it's a good fit, because ultimately the interview is a chemistry test to see if you're going to fit with them and they're going to fit with who you are. I mean, I don't know about you, Beth, but I've had a lot of clients that they've gotten in an interview and they just kind of come out saying, gosh, something about this position just isn't jiving with me. And sometimes, it's okay to walk away. It's hard when you're in a financially tough situation and you have to make decisions, like, am I gonna get the paycheck, or am I gonna be in a job where I'm gonna be really regretting the fact that I took this position? So it's a lot of that chemistry. What do you think about that?
I'm right on target with what you're saying. I don't know that I mean, just trying to do what you can to make sure it is a cultural fit. I think we've touched on a lot of that already. So yeah.
Yeah. And so sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, the cycle that you want to avoid, a lot of people think, especially if there's been a period of unemployment, more than a few months or something, but a lot of people feel like, oh, I have to take this job because, I'm running out of money, I won't be able to pay the electrical next week if it's been unemployment. But the big mistake a lot of job seekers do make is taking a job that they're not the right fit for, where the company just isn't a good cultural fit, doesn't provide what they need to be successful and to be happy long term in the job, and then we end up with this cycle of someone takes a job in a company that's not the best fit. 5-6 months later, they find themselves looking for another job again. They get desperate, take the first thing that comes along. We begin to see a cycle developing, which can really, over a long term, backfire. So making sure, taking the time to make sure the job you take is going to be the best one for you personally, where you can succeed, where you can set yourself up for success, and the company will give you the tools and provide the environment for you to be successful, is extremely important in job search. Don't take just the first thing that comes along out of desperation.
Right. So let's talk a little bit more about the prep part. So, doing the research is really important, so you have a really good comprehensive understanding about the company. And part of interview prep is you should also be thinking about what kinds of questions are you going to ask that company. And, this goes back to what I was saying earlier, is that, they're going to be asking questions, but the worst thing you can do is when they pause towards the end of the interview and say, do you have any questions for us? And say, oh, no, I don't have any. That really doesn't show a lot of engagement. So you need to put some forethought into some questions that you might want to ask them. And so there's some standard questions you can ask, and I'll talk about my favorite interview questions in just a second. But there's some standard questions you should ask, and then maybe some position-specific questions. So do you have any recommendations of some things that you can give some examples that people can write down, and then I'll give a couple of my favorites, and they may be the same. So do you have a couple questions that should be standard ones that people should ask as part of this back and forth dynamic?
Sure. So some standard questions that I think people should ask should be around kind of a subtle way to get some feedback from the interviewer on how they feel things are going. Some questions that I like to coach my clients to ask are based upon my background, based upon how this interview has gone. How are some ways you see me succeeding in this position? Is one. Another one might be again, to get a read and a feel for how you're doing in that interview, asking the interviewer, what do you think some of my shortcomings are, or something maybe a little more subtle along the lines of, what are some things that you think I would need to work on in this position?
I asked a similar question. I call it the heat check question, and this is based on our conversation today. Do you have any concerns about my ability to do the job? And so this is a very important stopping point in the conversation in the interview. And the reason why I really encourage people to ask this question, it's not necessarily a negative thing, but once you walk out of that room, no employer, well, almost none, will ever give you feedback on how you actually performed. You can't call and say, well, how do you think I did, or do you have any suggestions for improvement? They will never do that just for liability issues. But if you ask this question in the appropriate time and within the interview, basically, if they have some hesitations, that gives them a little bit of an opportunity to open up a little bit about that. And then it might be something that maybe you totally forgot to mention or didn't address during the interview. So it's a great opportunity to use that and say, here's a great response to that. They may say, okay, I've got some concerns, blah, 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 blah. And so your response to that would be say, I'm really glad you brought that up, because and then you can start talking about how you're, whatever it is that you can address that with. So it's a nice way to kind of seal the deal, because then they're saying, well, I'm really concerned that you haven't mentioned any skills in press releases. Well, I'm really glad you mentioned that, because actually I have written a lot of press releases, and here, let me give you some examples of some of the ones I did, or something like that. So you can really kind of refute in a nice kind of way some of their concerns. So you're basically removing the roadblocks and the concerns in that respect. Don't you agree?
Absolutely, I agree. I think you're right on target.
Okay, and do you have any other questions that you think job seekers should ask during the interview? Because this is an important point to see if there is that culture fit too.
Right. A question I like around that is to ask, perhaps ask a few questions regarding the company's onboarding process. Meaning, are they just going to, your first day of work, are you just going to show up, fill out the paperwork, and you're going to be thrown to the wolves? Or will they have a mentoring partnership, pair you with another successful employee in the company? What kind of orientation processes do they have? So you can get a feel for that. And then also, as far as ensuring that it's an environment, if you're an employee looking for continued professional development and opportunities for growth for your own career advantages, asking what kinds of succession opportunities are there in place.
But you do have to be careful about that, because you don't want to sound like you're so focused on advancing that you're really not going to pay attention to what you're doing right now.
Exactly.
There's been so many instances where job seekers end up sounding like they're ready to take their manager, the interviewer's job away from them. So you got to be careful about that.
Right. The key thing, I think, would be focusing on that onboarding process. Getting an idea of what they're, what structures do they have in place to make sure you can be successful in those first 60 to 90 days on the job. And typically, if you have a good feel for that, you'll have you can get a feel for, they may even share, oh, well, we're going to pair you up with someone who's the VP and they're actually being groomed to be the next, whatever, or that kind of thing, that you get a way to get a sense if there's some sort of succession planning. If it's a mid to large business, now your smaller companies, it's probably going to be a lot less formal, so you have to keep that in mind. So
exactly. You know, just a couple more questions I like to ask, and then we'll get into what to do while you're in the interview. And there's certainly a lot of stuff to talk about that. But a couple things that I always like to encourage people to ask as far as your interview prep is to have a question such as, what are the top priorities in the first 30 days? Or in order to be successful in this position, what do you see me needing to do? Or another one might be, what if you could tell me what the ideal candidate would be for this position, what would that person look like? So those are kind of some things to help get a better understanding of what their expectations are. And so being prepared in an interview, asking those proactive questions is going to help you look more like you've really given this position some serious consideration. It's not just a job, it is the job, and that's what they want to hear too. So,
right.
Let me kind of jump in, and I want to make sure we stay within our time limit here. But so Beth, let's talk about during the interview. So what are some things, tricks, and tips that you would encourage people to follow? You know, you got the interview, you've gotten into the room, and now you're in the hot seat. So other than answering specific questions, but what are some things to kind of keep in mind if you're a job candidate, and how do you think we should try to help people know how to perform within the interview? Because a lot of people are scared.
Right.
I personally love interviews. I like bring it on. I feel very comfortable with them. I'm kind of one of those freaks. I really enjoy them. So, but I know a lot of people are scared because this isn't, you know, I think personally, and I want to hear your feedback on this too, is that, you know, interviews are the one time where you're really trying to put value in what you've done for previous employers, and people don't feel comfortable doing that, and then they're scared because they're also thinking about, you know, there's so much at stake here. And so how do you coach people to try to get over some of those fears or concerns while they're in the middle of in the midst of things?
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Great questions. You know, the first thing is, obviously, this is something that we all think we know and that we're ready for, but body language in the interview as well as on camera. You know, you and I are trying to practice right now looking directly at the camera and not at the screen where we can see you. So, you know, but body language, making that eye contact, smiling, you know, having that conversational tone, not sounding too rehearsed with your answers. You know, we're talking about interview prep, but at the same time being conversational in your approach with people. So that first thing is the body language. The second thing is in responding to questions, you want to try, hopefully your interviewer will know to be asking open-ended questions to begin with, but to take the opportunity to answer the questions thoroughly, provide some stories, provide some of that background information where you can showcase your strengths and showcase and then back up those strengths with specific examples as to how you have demonstrated your strengths during your previous experiences.
I think I agree with that, and I think that, you know, for all the viewers here, that it's really important to think about if you can understand what the employer's really after, that can help predicate what kinds of answers you provide. So there's kind of the two main types of interviewing styles. There's behavioral interviewing and situational interviewing. And, you know, so behavioral is what have you done in the past. So give me an example of a time when. And then situational is more like it's more of a predictive behavior. What would you do if? Mm-hmm. And so, you know, the biggest piece that I always try to coach people on is to kind of keep the means to the end. What are they really after? If you can kind of pull back in your mind during the middle of the interview and say, aha, they're really trying to find out about X, then that can help you shape your answer so that you bring your answer so it circles back around to satisfying what they're after. And another thing is, you know, people get nervous. I mentioned that before. So one thing you can do to try in the middle of the interview is to buy time is to, number one, repeat the question back in the form of a statement. That's a great one because, so where do you want to be in 5 years? Well, in 5 years, I plan on, and so you're kind of giving yourself a little bit of mental buying in time. So you can try to find some time to figure out what you want to say, or it's okay to have a pause. And you could say, I would really like to give you a good answer. Let me just think for just a second about that. And even in that time that you've said that, you can pause briefly, and then you've given yourself a little bit more time to think about how you want to frame it up. So do you have any other tips in that respect, Beth?
I think we're on the same line, on the same mindset there. I coach my clients to do the exact same thing. Little things too that you can always do when you're not quite sure about what to say. Take a sip of your coffee before you to give it a little. Well, this is water, but give a sip of coffee or something. To take a sip of coffee to give yourself time to think about that response. But certainly, I totally ditto exactly what you said.
It's okay too if you're not sure what they're really asking.
Yeah.
I mean, is it okay to ask them? Say, can you please rephrase the question? I mean, I would think that's okay to ask. What do you think?
Certainly asking for clarification on the question, but also if they ask a question about a situation where you haven't encountered a particular situation. Let's say I'll sometimes in coaching sessions throw a real off the wall ringer kind of question, like, what would you do if you suspected your coworker of embezzlement, in a financial situation, like, and if someone, hopefully nobody's ever been in that situation, but I think it's okay to say, I've never been in that situation before, but certainly there's all kinds of
ramifications involved here.
Yeah, there's all kinds of problems, and negative results, negative impacts from something like that. That's where you can always say, the first thing I would do is make sure that, see if there's policies in place for reporting that sort of thing. Consult the handbook. Consult the corporate handbook is always a really safe answer.
Right.
But being able to rely on those kinds of things and say, and even say, thankfully I've never been in that situation, but, take a deep breath and say, this is probably what I would do, but try to always revert back to referring to company policy, referring to a corporate handbook, seeing what steps are in place to deal with those kinds of issues and situations directly.
Yeah. Now I want to talk about one more thing while we're in the interview, because sometimes we get asked very difficult questions for personal reasons. Maybe it could be some very touchy subject areas, and so maybe it's the reason why we left another company, or there's a million different things that could be out there. So sometimes, or even a skill set. So there's a couple different things that I would try to advise viewers too. If you're asked a question that gets into some uncomfortable territory, there's a trick called redirecting. You can partially answer their question to sort of satisfy them and then point them in a different direction. So you're taking their thought away from whatever the question's origination was all about. For example, or you could, well, it's kind of a redirect. There was one time that I was in an interview, and it was a really tough interview. It was for a very top-level position that I ended up not taking, but the interview was going great. It was actually a panel interview, and I was zooming along, and all of a sudden I got this question, and basically it was a skill set I did not possess. And so in my mind, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I don't have it. Shut everything down. It's over. I've just lost the whole job. I was about, in my mind, But I thought, you know what? Why don't you, instead of running away from it and trying to give an evasive answer, I actually went right to it and said, I don't possess this skill, whatever it was, I can't even remember now. I don't possess this skill, but that's one of the reasons why I wanted to work here, because you've sort of set the standard for this, and I know I'd be learning from great people.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of distracts from that, and it's a compliment. But, you should never be dishonest within an interview. But if you can, if you're getting in uncomfortable territory, redirects are great. And so you give them partially some of the answer, but then you push it away from the topicality. What do you think, Beth? I mean, I want to make sure we answer that question. We'll move on to post-interview here.
Sure. I think that's a brilliant answer. I mean, I really don't have anything to add to that. You're right on with the advice I would give too.
Okay, well, that's great. Well, and sometimes, again, it might be something you don't want to talk about. You can, for example, everybody gets the question, what's one of your weaknesses? And
sure.
So it might be that, I get a little frustrated because sometimes people aren't very clear. They're very vague when they give me information that's critical for me doing my job. But what I've learned to do is to set up meetings proactively. I've learned a lot more patience, but I've also proactively set up a weekly meeting so we can discuss everything so that there's more clarity. So you're moving away from the negative part and you're talking about what you've done that's a positive win out of it. So That's a great way to try to handle questions like that. So.
Right. Right.
Okay, so let's keep going. So we've got just a few more minutes left. So let's talk about post-interview because this is an important part. A lot of people, they walk out of the room, they're done sweating, and they just get out to their car and they have the hyper, I'm done with the interview. So, and then they drive away. So what do you think people should do it just is an equally important part of the post-interview follow-up process?
Post-interview follow-up process, always being ready with the thank you note. Some people asked today, do I really need to send the thank you note? Should I follow up somehow? Is it okay to send the email? The answer to that is yes. Send a thank you email. That's totally fine. Send the thank you handwritten note. That's totally fine. Send the thank you typed note. That's fine. I used to even give advice of take paper stationery with you, thank you cards, and write the thank you note before you leave the parking lot. Take the stamps with you and mail it on your way out so that you've got that immediate follow-up. So the follow-up there. But then, if you have this, if you have friends that do work in the company, seeing if they can subtly just follow up for you and get some of that feedback. Because if it's one of those that didn't go well and one of those that aren't going to turn out well, the only person who's going to possibly give you any advice back would be a friend or recommendation that you had going in there. They say, well, hey, we think Joe was a great guy, but there was just one thing that was a concern, and we've got to interview some other folks. And you can get that kind of feedback from an inside referral with the company too.
Right. And something else, I agree with you on the thank you notes. One thing that I keep banging this in people's heads. You must send it, you must send it, and you must send it. Because I think some statistic I saw was like 96% people don't send thank you notes. So definitely standing out. But a thank you note is another touch point. In the advertising world, they say it takes a minimum of 5 touch points before a person's brand or a brand starts sticking with an audience. And you got to think about your own personal brand. So that's one of those touch points. But more importantly, a thank you note is an opportunity. If you forgot something that was pretty major in the interview, the thank you note might be something or another example that you think would be a good illustration of how you're a good fit with the job. It's a great way to bring those pieces up and then also reiterate your interest in the job or your excitement. As I was driving away from the interview, it occurred to me that, I also had another opportunity, another example of whatever it was, and I think this is another way that shows that I'm a great fit with your company. Look forward to hearing from you soon, that kind of thing. So that's a really nice way to kind of use the thank you note as another opportunity to mention something. I mean, I know I was in an interview a long time ago with a restaurant association, and I forgot to mention in the interview that I actually worked in a restaurant before. So, silly things like that. But it's important to use that as another follow-up mechanism, not just to thank them for their time, of course, but then it's a great opportunity to kind of reinforce something that you may have forgotten or just to strengthen a point you've already made with them. So that's a great thing to do too.
Right. Especially if there was a point where the two of you really felt agreed on something, and that there was a specific connection. I'll have my clients say, hey, I really think that we shared the same view on X, and show and state what that was. So, as you said, those common points and those common characteristics to show that you're a good fit for that company. Exactly.
Now, this is something else that I coach people on too as well. So you're done with your interview, you've sent your thank you note, and of course during the interview it's always important to ask what's the next step, so you get an idea about when they're going to be making a decision, and then asking permission-based, may I follow up if I don't hear from you in 2 weeks or whatever it is. So that's always good. So you have some reason to follow up. But I always encourage people to do what I call, it's called a job interview autopsy. That sounds rather morbid, but this is where you have to really think about what just transpired, and chances are you're not going to just have one interview. You're going to have a lot of interviews. That's just the way it works. And so you're going to need to make sure that you're continuously improving your interviewing. So being honest and writing down all the questions that you just had in the interview is going to be really helpful to practice for your next interview. But also being honest with yourself and saying, what did I do well? And then maybe what did I do poorly? And being really open to that self-feedback, so you can really understand how to maybe revise how you answered questions in the past. I mean, what do you think, Beth? I mean, have you done that with your clients as well?
To be honest, no. I mean, I'll ask them, how do you think it went? So I guess if you want to, maybe it's a different term, that feedback, that examination process, sure. But I think the important thing there too is if you just went to an interview that you didn't feel went bad, or you walk out of there going, oh, I totally was awful, they hate me, or hey, I rocked it, I mean
Right.
But if you do leave an interview feeling like, oh my gosh, that was the worst interview I've ever had, don't beat yourself up. Take it as a learning opportunity. Regroup. Take those questions that you were just asked that you didn't have the right answers for, or fumbled over the answers, and say, okay, how could I do that better next time? Get yourself back to a positive frame of mind.
Mm-hmm.
The worst part about the interview is that if there's only one person who can be hired, and you're one of 4 people who went on that interview, 3 of those 4 people are going to be rejected, and you've got to be able to set yourself up for that. I used to even tell clients, preparing for an you're in a job search, and you're going to be rejected more than you were in high school, and
That's true. You can't take it personally. I mean, there's a million different reasons why you weren't chosen, but
right.
I think it also. I think there's something deeper here too, because just as we discussed earlier, that interviews aren't just them investigating you. You're doing the same kind of investigation. So let's say you bombed out in an interview. Part of it is, okay, let's take some ownership. Well, maybe what I didn't do right here, but then the other piece might be on the flip side. Maybe this company wasn't the right fit, and part of this is maybe you need to do a little bit better research on the companies that you're applying to make sure there's a better fit too, because it could have been that they were, I've been in interviews before. I mean, I've done a lot of interviews in my past, and just looking around the room, I've seen some dynamics that didn't really fit with who I was, and it didn't go well because I could clearly see that there was one very domineering person in the interview, and that kind of shifted how things, what we talked about in the dynamics. And so I knew I bombed out, but I started thinking, okay, what was my problem here? But then I started thinking, well, what's their part of the ownership of why this wasn't successful too? So it's kind of a narrowing process too. What do we can do to fix ourselves? But then maybe we need to do a better job of identifying better fits before we even go into the interview too. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's important. Again, trying to make sure that before you even go into the company that you have a good, thorough understanding of that job. I went on an interview with a company, with a very prominent employer in the Baltimore area one time, and I had some reservations before going into that interview, But you know, I almost felt like it would be a step backwards in my career if I, you know, if I was offered the job. And you know, it actually did become very clear during the interview that if that position was offered to me, it really would have been a step backwards in my career, and I wasn't desperate for the position. It's not something that it was worth sacrificing the strides that I'd made to that point. So, you know, and in the end, you know, I did not get the job offer because it became very clear during that interview, and I was totally okay with that because I didn't want to go backwards in my career. We want to move forward, you know.
You know, that begs, and I kind of want to maybe finish with this because we're towards the end of our time here. But what happens if we're in the middle of an interview and we just know we don't want the job? It's, you know, they don't want us, we don't want them. What do you do? And that, I'm sure people have had that happen. I mean, I've had that happen. And so do you just bravely soldier on, or do you say, you know what, I don't think that there, you know, it's pretty clear right now that there isn't a very good fit, and I don't want to waste your time, and I want to be respectful, you're a busy person, so why don't we end this now? I mean, is that a brave thing to do, or is it a stupid thing to do? What do you think?
It's a little bit of both. You know, that's where you don't want to burn that bridge. You know, certainly you're interviewing for a specific position, and they're trying to find the right person for that very specific position. But that's where you really maybe you do want to acknowledge, you know, I really think this interview isn't going the way that I, you know, along the path that I would like. I think it's becoming clear that for this particular role, you know, maybe I'm not the best fit for this particular role. However, you know, that's where you can at least salvage that opportunity and say, you know, maybe you can change directions with it. Say, well, have you ever thought about being able to have someone who could do this? Mm-hmm. Is there a need for X within the company? Do you see the role expanding, or do you see yourself bringing in other team members around this particular role or initiative, or maybe they're setting up a new department? You never know what's going to go on, you know, and companies restructure all the time. That's where you want to try to at least salvage that relationship.
Right.
You've got to think of it as a networking opportunity. Hey, you've got the inside person. You've got a seat at the table right there. Do what you can to use that to your advantage and even pursue that relationship. And in the follow-up, you know, with the thank you notes, hey, you know, I know that we decided that we want to move in different directions with this position, although I would like the opportunity to continue, you know, staying in touch, and can we, you know, try to find a way to put that person into your network and to, you know, follow up with them down the road on a fairly regular basis, because if they remember you, you know, you've got some good qualities that maybe they remember, and that was just a role that you weren't the best fit for. But sure, there could be other opportunities that develop within the company. So don't burn the bridge and go, hey, you know, this isn't a good fit, we're done.
Well, yeah, exactly. And, you know, I was being very direct there. But, you know, it could be just say, you know, I just want to ask a clarification question. You know, my understanding was X, and it appears that this conversation is talking about Y, and you know, I want to make sure that this is going to be a good fit. How, you know, again, this is sort of a heat check question. You know, how do you see these pieces fitting together? Maybe they see it, maybe you don't see it, maybe you see it, but they don't see it. You know, so that's a great way to try to touch on that. So one thing I kind of as a wrap up, and I encourage any viewers, if you have any questions, use the chat function, and this is your time to ask us some questions here. So make sure you go in the group chat. Otherwise, we'll be wrapping this up here shortly. But you know, one thing that I always encourage, and this is kind of a last piece. So you did the interview, did all this prep, and you sent the thank you note, and then you don't get the job. So yes, that's very frustrating. It happens a lot. That's just sort of normal. But one thing I encourage people to do is, if you don't get the job, send another thank you note. Nobody does that. And right, it's kind of a nice touch, because what you're saying earlier, Beth, because I really think this is a great segue, is that it's all about building that relationship. you could say, you know, I'm really, of course I was disappointed about not receiving the job offer, but, you know, I really was really impressed by the integrity of your company, and I felt as though we had a really strong rapport, and I'd appreciate it if you keep me in mind for other future position openings and da-da-da-da. So I think that's kind of, you know, you don't hear too many people saying thank you notes for rejections, but, you know, that's a nice way to stand out and really make sure that you're showing you're classy and you have integrity. So
Yeah.
Anyway,
don't take it personally.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
and maybe it wasn't you. Maybe it was, you know, maybe it was you were pushing the envelope a little bit beyond what they budgeted for the job. You know, and it's, you know, and that it wasn't you, it was the higher ups going, no, can't make it happen. You know,
right.
There's someone else who will work cheaper, who's just as qualified, we'll take that person. You know, so and it literally could come down to that. So you never know. So
and you never know that by how the way you handled that, it could be that maybe the first person ends up, if something happens and they don't decline the job, or they, you know, they're not available anymore, or that kind of thing. So you might be second fiddle, and you would be chosen after that. So
sure. And you got a bargaining chip too. You know,
exactly.
Well, you know. What's it going to take? So, you know, well, I want more than what you paid that person. Well, you know, that person didn't work out. Well, you know, you got us between a rock and a hard place now. You know, but anyway,
right.
Kind of
well, I don't know. Does any of our viewers right now have any questions? Make sure you use the group chat here. It's on the right-hand side. If you can use Google plus Hangout, there's a group chat function on the left-hand side you can click on and then write your question on the right-hand side. Otherwise, do you have anything else you want to add, Beth? Otherwise, we'll wrap it up here.
You know, I think we've covered a whole lot today in interviewing. I mean, you know, we could write a book in volumes, and you know, we've got videos on interviewing out there. But yeah, I think the key thing when you go into an interview, be yourself, be natural. You know, don't try to be someone who you're not. And if you're a shy person, that's okay. There are a lot of shy people out there. You know, just be assertive in how you talk about your strengths and interact with the person, but don't think that if you're not an outgoing kind of person, or if you're not an extrovert, that you have no shot at getting the job. You just be yourself, because that's what they're trying to hire the right person anyway. So
right. And you know, this is always something to keep in mind, is just sort of a final wrap up here, is that, you know, employers are hoping that you're going to be the best fit for the position. They don't want to keep looking. So they want you to be that person that walks in the door and say, oh my gosh, we totally need to hire this person. We don't have to look anymore. That's what they're hoping for. So they're not hoping that they can weed you out. They're looking at the point in the interview, they're looking for the right fit. So if you are shy, and I'm shy, is to get involved in like Toastmasters or something like that. That's an invaluable skill. So practice. I always say there's no such thing as a bad interview, because if you have a terrible performance in an interview, that's where you can use that autopsy and kind of go through and figure out what did you do right, what did you do wrong, and practice. So the more you learn from it, the better you'll get at it. It's like a muscle. You have to keep flexing to build it up and make it stronger. And, you know, just remember that, you know, everybody is a subject matter expert. You're there because they recognize from your resume that you have something valuable to contribute. So feel grounded in the fact that you're there because they see the value in what you bring to the company. So feel good about that. They should be very excited, because this is the one opportunity where you can sit down and really get into a great discussion. I've had someone tell me before that think of as an interview as a business meeting, and it really is a business meeting. And try not to think about what the stakes are, because if you do that, you're going to put so much pressure on yourself that you're really not going to be in the moment. You're going to be thinking, oh, well, if I answer this wrong, then it's all over, turn out the lights, that kind of thing. So just try to enjoy and focus in the moment, and just be grounded on what you have to offer. And if you've done your prep work, you know your stuff, you're going to do great.
Right. So. Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better myself.
Anyway, well, I think we'll wrap it up here. Thank you so much, Beth, for participating today. I really appreciate your insights. You've got some great knowledge, and obviously you've got a wonderful interview series coming up. When is that? Do you know when that's going to be launched off your website?
We are hoping to have the hard DVD copy videos. I know that sounds a little old school right now, but we got to start somewhere. Hoping to have those videos together by the tail end of September, and then we are going to be putting together a video channel, sort of a on-demand channel through Vimeo.
Okay.
Once that's taken care of, and I think I would just ask people to watch the website, just the Chesapeake Career Management Services website, and we'll have further details as those do become available. We're in the final production stages now, so
Awesome.
kind of the editing, final editing stages. So.
Well, that's great. Well, thanks again for joining us, and I thank everybody who watched today, and hopefully you got some good nuggets, and we'll be back next month with another topic. I haven't decided on what that is yet, and hopefully another guest. So thanks again, and have a great week. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.